What's up guys, I'm Aaron, the creative director here at Junk Removal Authority. Today we're going to be talking about the basics of taking good photos for your junk removal business. So why do you even need to know about taking pictures? You're in junk removal. You don't need to be a professional photographer, but you still need good quality pictures for your website and social media pages. Those are your online face to your customers, and you need clear shots to post or you won't look professional. We're going to look at three major components that make up good pictures: composition, lighting, and camera settings. Quick disclaimer, you don't have to have the world's greatest camera to take good pictures. Use your phone camera if that's all you have. Just know that you'll be severely limited in photo quality, so you'll have to get creative. I recommend buying a decent camera that lets you adjust at least the aperture and shutter speed. Part 1. Composition. Composition is basically how you frame up and arrange the objects or subject in your shot. While you can compose a shot any way you like, there's one basic rule that can instantly improve your photo quality. It's called the rule of thirds. The rule of thirds works like this. Take the image you see through your viewfinder or camera screen and mentally divide it into thirds, both horizontally and vertically, so you end up with 9 different sections. This gives you 4 lines and 4 intersections. Those intersections identify 4 important points of your photo, and the lines are useful for positioning other elements. As strange as it may seem, many studies have shown that our eyes don't naturally go to the center of a picture. Instead, they focus on these important points we just identified. Try to align long elements in your photos, such as the horizon, the edge of a driveway, or a standing person, with the imaginary lines in your shot. If you find yourself struggling to align your shots properly, don't worry, you'll get better with time. And there's plenty of free photo editing software out there you can use to crop and reframe your shots. In addition to the rule of thirds, pay attention to your body position and the angle at which you're shooting. You don't have to keep your feet on the ground the whole time. Crouch, lie down, climb on top of your truck, do whatever you need to do, safely, to get that shot right. Make sure you know exactly what and where your subject is, and figure out the best angle to show it. Take as many shots as you need to get it right. By composing your shots using the rule of thirds, and by getting a little creative with your angles, you'll help people interact more naturally with your photos, making them more aesthetically pleasing. Part 2. Lighting. Guys, you're gonna be out in the field taking pictures on the job, not in a controlled studio environment like I'm in now. We're not talking about using these big artificial studio lights here. Since most of your shots are gonna be outside or in people's homes, you won't have total control over the lighting conditions like you would in studio. Instead, you'll need to adapt to your environment. As a general rule, if you can shoot during the first 2 or last 2 hours of light, do it. That's when the natural sunlight is best for photography. Sometimes you simply won't be able to shoot during the best hours. Maybe you've got a hot tub job at noon that you want to photograph. A good trick is to hold your hand out in front of you and rotate it in every direction. Pay attention to how the light interacts with it and where shadows form. This will give you a good idea of how the light will interact with larger objects as well. When you see lighting you like on your hand, recreate it on your larger subject. If it's late or early, take pictures using streetlights and other artificial sources to create good, somewhat dramatic lighting. I don't recommend using flash as an amateur. Flash is very complicated to get right. It can produce some very dramatic results, but these aren't necessary or even very helpful for our purposes in junk removal. The biggest keys with lighting are to make sure your subjects aren't overexposed or washed out, or they're too dark to see. Part 3. Camera settings. If you're taking pictures on your phone, this is where you're really gonna hurt. Adjusting the camera settings can work wonders, especially under lighting conditions that are less than ideal. Don't worry, you don't need to know every single setting on your camera. The more you know, the better you can control your shots, but the main 2 settings we'll focus on here are aperture and shutter speed. These 2 factors determine the exposure of the shot. Aperture refers to the size of the lens diaphragm on your camera. When it's in auto mode, aperture works a lot like our eyes. When there's a lot of light, it narrows, and when there's a little light, it widens. Aperture is measured in f-stops, for example f5.6, f8, and f11. The smaller the number, the wider the diaphragm, and the more light is allowed in. The higher the number, the less light is allowed into the camera. In addition, aperture adjusts the depth of field, or how much of your photo appears in focus. A wide aperture or a lower f-stop results in a shallow depth of field, which is great for portraits or close shots. A narrow aperture with a higher f-stop is better for landscape shooting. In junk removal, you'll stick mostly to lower f-stops. Shutter speed limits the amount of light hitting the camera lens by controlling the length of time the shutter opens during shooting. The higher the shutter speed, the more light is allowed in, and the lower the shutter speed, the less light hits the lens. Shutter speed also affects the blur of the photo. The longer your shutter is open, the blurrier your shot will be if there's any motion. Crisp motion shots require a very fast shutter speed, such as 1/500th of a second or even 1/1000th of a second. Portraits, on the other hand, can be shot using 1/125 or 1/80 shutter speeds. Aperture and shutter speed work together to determine exposure. As you adjust one, you should adjust the other to maintain proper exposure. For example, as you widen the aperture with a lower f-stop, you allow more light to hit the camera lens. To compensate, you should increase the shutter speed to reduce the length of time the shutter remains open. Fortunately, adjustments to these settings are typically made evenly. That is, if you widen your aperture by one f-stop, for example from f5.6 to f8, you should increase your shutter speed by one f-stop as well, say from 1/125 to 1/250. There's one other setting you can adjust if necessary: ISO. ISO, in simple terms, brightens or darkens your photos. As you increase ISO, your photos get brighter, and as you decrease ISO, they get darker. This makes ISO a very useful setting in dark environments such as dimly lit basements and attics. However, increasing ISO to brighten your shots does come with a consequence: noise. Noise is that grainy look that sometimes appears in some photos. Ever notice how cell phone pics you take in dark areas end up looking super grainy? Well, since your phone can't adjust aperture and shutter speed like a true camera can, it compensates by increasing ISO. The resulting photos are of poor quality. For that reason, you should only increase ISO once you've maximized your adjustments to shutter speed and aperture. If lowering your shutter speed any more would result in image blurring, it's time to adjust ISO. Alright guys, those are the basics. Remember, good photos are about composition, lighting, and camera settings. Get used to your equipment and practice, practice, practice. With some experimentation and a bit of experience and patience, you'll be taking great pictures for your website and social media pages in no time. Speaking of social media, be sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more great junk removal business tips. If there's something you'd like us to cover or a question you want answered, be sure to leave it in the comments below. Thanks everybody. If you liked this video, please give us a like and subscribe to our channel. Now get out there, get shooting, and get those pictures posted.